All right, boys and gals, the time that we have been waiting for, or maybe just me, power rankings. So I've gone through every individual team and every individual player in all previous 10 videos. So if you want to go watch, my specific thoughts on a particular team, maybe more in depth, go watch those videos. But in here, I'm going to be breaking down who I think is the best team and who I think is the worst team. So I noticed for a lot of other people's power rankings in the past, what they've done is they've done a tier list. Fuck that shit. That's a pussy shit. We're going to do ranks 1 through 10. Who's the worst team and who's the best team. So I've got a little graphic here. Yeah, I'm using the tier list, but instead of tiers, I'm, doing 1 through 10. So, and I haven't looked at anyone else's power rankings. I haven't even decided who I want to be, first through 10th. But we're going to go through this together, right? So take a sip of your beer and enjoy the show. So, obviously, for number 1, I'm going to be choosing Team Liquid. They are looking to be the strongest team just on paper. You have, an insane, crazy amount of names. I actually have all the names pulled up here because I can't fucking memorize 50 people. But yeah, Bwipo, Santorin, Bjergsen, Hansama, and Core JJ. Like, this is just a powerhouse of a team. As I said previously, this is like a super duper team. I think the only real super big upgrades that you could get would be in either jungle or in top lane, and I think mostly in top lane. But in jungle, this guy fits perfectly with the team. But the big problem that I have with this entire squad is that I think they're going to suffer from essentially being too sacrificial amongst each other. Because if you look at all the personalities, they're all self-sacrificing players, besides Han Sama, right? But Bjergsen's very self-sacrificing, Bwipo's self-sacrificing, Santorin self-sacrificing, Core JJ is also, or rather, he kind of roams around the map and gets things done, right? So he activates the map. So I wouldn't necessarily call that self-sacrificing, but you get the point. So that's the big caveat that I have with this team, but it's just too fucking good on paper, right? So I think that is, a big bonus for them, I suppose. So let's go on to team number 2. That's, of course, going to be 100 Thieves. I think their entire roster is quite good, and this is only judging spring split, by the way. So we're not even going to get into summer power rankings because I think it would shift a little bit different. There would be some teams that I expect to ramp up and some teams that I expect to fall back. 100 Thieves is one of those teams I expect to fall back going into summer. But in spring, they're going to have the initial built-in synergy. I still don't think they're going to be able to solve their top lane problem of someday just not having a wide champion pool, him just seemingly not being able to keep up with other top laners, etc., and falling down in performance. So that's to be foretold as to whether he can actually shore those problems up. But I don't expect him to be able to do that. And on top of that, though, I do think for all the 100 Thieves fans, you shouldn't be concerned in regards to 100 Thieves actually, not coming out the gate. I think they're going to come out swinging, and they're still going to be a really good team. And on top of that, I always thought that Closer actually works really good in the summer or in the spring splits oftentimes because it's a new meta. He's trying out new things, and he just seems to keep up his aggression even early on in the spring split. So this is the big bonuses that I see for 100 Thieves. So I think they're a pretty good team just overall and just rounding out, I guess you could say. So for the third team, shit, I don't even know who I'm gonna pick, guys. No, I know who I'm gonna pick, and it's gonna be Cloud9. So for Cloud9, it's kind of weird picking this team because you look at all the names and you're just a lot of these guys are unproven. You haven't really seen any games from these dudes. Summit, I've barely watched any of his games, if ever. And then Berserk, I've never seen this guy even play, and Winsome as well too. So now you have the staple people, which is Blabber and Fudge. I think Fudge can actually go into the mid lane and perform quite well. But one of the caveats, which I said in my Cloud9 video, was that his biggest strength is wave management, and wave management becomes less important in mid lane. And in fact, wave management really is only important in top lane, I would say. There are still some of that factor within mid lane, but just not as much because the lane isn't as long. So now I'm wondering how that's going to affect that entire process, along with Fudge's, I guess, ability to read the waves and also call his jungler Blabber over to then capitalize on those waves in the wave state. So that becomes harder in mid lane. So I wonder how that synergy is going to work out. I think that Summit coming in is probably going to be pretty fucking good. And then Berserker, I guess, is heralded as like this great ADC. So I think all of this is good, but there is, I think Cloud9 is like just barely above, the dark horse status in terms of like teams that I think will, they'll definitely make playoffs, but it's whether they're going to be good or not. And I think that largely depends on the coaching staff, which LS is now a head coach. And one of the things that I'm afraid of is maybe the team synergy breaking apart because of Korean players, and also with the Korean speaker on the team, which I believe is Winsome, having to break all of that down. And that's a lot of responsibility on such a young player. So that's going to be very difficult as well. And then you have, personality management, which LS, while he does have a bright mind for the game, that doesn't necessarily mean that he can handle personalities, right? That's a completely different aspect of coaching in that regard. So that's why I'm hesitant to even put Cloud9 even further up, and especially considering that I haven't watched 3 of their fucking players basically play. So I can't rank them any higher than this, but I think as the spring split progresses, well, first at the very beginning, I think this is going to be a really interesting team, because if you think of just LS and how he operates, he is often one to discover new things and is really not afraid to go against the grain. But I'm wondering too is if he's going to be caught between like two sides of his mind, because you can tell, at least when you listen a lot of LS's philosophy about the game, is there's one side where he criticizes people's drafts because they don't draft optimally. And then second is that he likes innovative and new things, right? And so you're going to see these two visions collide, because often what is largely criticized of LS is the fact that, well, he hasn't been in that team's shoes. Maybe that, those particular champions work for those particular players. So how can you criticize the draft because you aren't in the team, because you don't know what style that those players particularly play towards, or what champions that they're necessarily good at behind, closed doors. So we're going to see all of these little answers being meshed when he does his drafts. And I think that's going to be really interesting, especially at the very beginning of the split, which I think is where his strengths are going to really shine. And that's why I expect Cloud9 to actually do well in spring split. So for team number 4, actually, and I think this is gonna be a little bit more, I guess, controversial, you could say. Actually, I don't know if I do want to place this team up there. Okay, I'm gonna go with the safe bet. I think, you know what? No, we're gonna go with Immortals. So now you're wondering, like, okay, you're just doing that to be a contrarian. No, actually, when you look at Immortals and how they did over in 2021, I thought they were actually a pretty good team, but they ended up faltering as, I guess, time went on, right? They came out the gate really fucking good. If you guys remember in Spring Split, Xerxes was a beast, a fucking beast. And this is kind of what I'm going to rely on for the Spring Split as well, and the fact that he is also one to experiment a lot with different jungle picks, different routes, different styles, etc. And if you go back and watch my interview that I did with him before, he complained that because essentially there were too many days of broadcast or too many days of games. That meant there was less experimentation because there is 1 day less of scrims. So now he has that extra day of scrims. And on top of that, he has an entirely new meta. So when you contribute all of those factors put in, and this is going to be like my dark horse kind of team, I think they're going to be largely underestimated. And especially with PoE bringing in a more stable mid lane, I think this team's actually going to do really well. I've always thought Wild Turtle is a good bot laner. PoE is obviously a great mid laner. And then you have Xerxes, who's a great jungler. Like all those three put together. And then you have Revenge, who hopefully can shore up his champion pool even more. I thought he did quite a good job in 2021 in terms of shoring up his champion pool. He has shown that he could actually play different styles and different champions. But I want to see him clean up his play a little bit more in terms of being more reserved when it comes to making those aggressive plays. You could see sometimes that he was caught out a lot or pushing too hard and then would end up dying to the enemy jungler. So I think if he's able to shore those things up, this team is actually going to be really deadly and it's going to be under the fucking radar. So that's one big team that I'm just looking out for. So now in fifth, of course, I'm going to put TSM, right? TSM would have gotten fourth if not for Immortals, but I think Immortals initially are going to have a better starting point. That's basically the reason why I put them fourth rather than TSM, because TSM has a lot of shit to figure out, dude. This is the most experimental roster I think that you can even come up with in terms of that within the LCS, right? Because you have 2 Chinese imports, and who knows exactly how they're going to be able to adapt both to the culture of North America, but also just to the LCS itself. It seems like LPL is just on a land of its own. Like no one really knows what goes over there. It's like the Shadowland. And like they have, oftentimes they operate on their own completely different meta. I mean, fuck, I think last year I saw, or rather this year, right? I saw Corki playing in mid, and like, who the fuck plays Corki? It's 2021, but weird. So with that, Kuaido and Shenyi are coming over from the LPL or, the LDL, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's a really big risk. And on top of that, Spica has the responsibility of translating a lot of this shit. And I feel like the team is going to lean more heavily towards Mandarin, maybe. I don't know. And so this is going to be really difficult to develop this system initially. So that's why I think TSM are going to be slow out the gate, because that entire system to develop, no one's ever done. And secondly, it's just going to be a completely new system. And they don't have any other kind of rule book, I guess you could say, to go off of. Of course, you do have teams that are mostly Korean. And so a lot of people have to learn Korean and, being able to talk to Korean players. And that's somewhat of a similar type of thing. But people still haven't done this with LPL players. And on top of that, too, you have to consider, the fact that LPL offseason happens so late, which is fucking weird, which is also why I think LCS teams and LEC teams don't pick up any Chinese players, because their offseason happens like after ours, basically, because of the whole Demacia Cup and stuff. So, yes, this is a very big risk, but as I said before, if we were making like a power ranking, into summer, I think this team will probably gear up. But let's go with the hard part of, I guess, this entire power ranking. Actually, you know what? No, we're gonna flip the script. We're gonna go with last place, because I think that's gonna be just way easier. So we're obviously gonna go with Dignitas. Dignitas, this lineup is just incredibly lackluster. Like I said in my video, the top lane, I think Fake God did have his great moments, but it doesn't seem like he provides anything to the team. Sometimes he has great carry performances, but his champion pool is incredibly, incredibly slim. It's Renekton and Gnar. So if those guys are out of meta, then you're basically fucked. Luckily, Gnar is a pretty versatile champion, so usually he's somewhat acceptable in the meta, regardless. He's kind of like the Lee Sin of fucking top lane. So, yeah, that is a big concern. Neo is like the most mediocre ADC in LCS, and then you have Biofrost, who's basically just on his way out and did not look good, and hasn't played for like a year. And then you have Blue, who is this random from the EU LCS, or the LEC rather, right? I'm still stuck in the fucking past with that. Back in LEC with, what was it, SK Gaming, right? And yeah, sure, I guess I hear that there was some turmoil with that team, but it's a really big fucking chance to take on this guy. And then you have River coming over from, I believe it's the TCL. Yeah. So this is a big risk for like everything. Or no, it was the PCS. Yeah, PCS. So yeah, this team is like, it's not just a risk for both the mid lane and the jungle, but you didn't take a risk on any of the other players. So it seems like a hodgepodge roster that didn't really have any intention when it came to the building of the roster. So I still think that Dignitas have a lot to fucking work on when it comes to just their general managing. So now let's skip back over to 6th place, because that made it a little bit easier, right? Now we only have 4 teams left. So I'm going to put Evil Geniuses in 6th. I think there are just a little bit too many question marks. I don't know who this Jojo Pyun guy is in mid lane. And then Inspired, I think it's a decent pickup. It makes sense. But then you have, Vulcan, who knows if he's going to come back into form. I think he's still a good player, and I still think that he has a lot of life left. But can he come back into form? That's a really big question. So, yeah, I think Evil Geniuses, at least from the mid lane, that's a really big question mark. And that's obviously one of the biggest power spots that you need to fill, because everyone rounds out their team with a star mid laner. So this is going to be something, I guess, of kind of an experiment, but I like this aspect because Evil Geniuses, what they've done is they've noticed that everyone else is building a budget roster. So this is the time actually for them to come out and build around someone that they believe is going to be a good player, right? Which is Jojo Pyun. So like, this is the perfect opportunity if you're going to do it at any moment in time, bringing up someone from Academy into the LCS. So I respect their game plan. I respect the vision, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time in order for them to come into their own necessarily. So that's why I have them in 6th spot, but I think they'll make playoffs. So now we get into 7th, 8th, and 9th. Fuck, this is getting kind of hard, huh? So, okay. So I think I know who I'm going to pick, and that's going to be CLG. CLG 7th. Yeah, they are coming on up, guys. It's a long way up from the bottom, but they're slowly grinding up. I think this team is, I think what CLG are trying to do is they're trying to bank on North American talent, right? Like, which is great to do, especially if you're on a budget year, which obviously CLG are on a budget year, especially with all their spending that they did before with that previous lineup of, it was like, Pobelter, Broxa, all that shit. So, yeah, now they're on budget year, but this actually, a lot of it makes sense. And so they have, Jenkins, who is a great top laner, at least from what we saw when he was playing in for Team Liquid and for Alphari. So like, that's a great bet. Contracts, a little bit iffy on, but okay. Maybe you didn't have a whole lot of options. Give him another shot. That's fine. You have Palafox and Luger and then Poom. So I think like this entire roster is actually a pretty good idea. And if you have to do a budget roster, this is fantastic. So, big ups to the general manager that actually came up with this entire thing. I think with how hype Luger has, been touted over in Academy, along with Poom, who had a short stint in the LCS, but he was brought up because of, circumstances of, I think it was like import status or some shit like that. Then yeah, like this is a fantastic bet. I think this is a solid bot lane, and then you have Palafox, who is trying to come out and, come into his own in the LCS. And then you have Jenkins, who is shown to be a pretty good top laner. So this is like a great squad. I think they'll do at least decently enough. They'll be a team which might actually surprise a lot of other teams if they're not careful against playing CLG and not underestimating them. But as we see this team go further and further over into the summer split, then we'll actually have a good judge of whether these group of players and this like team itself is actually a good lineup or not. I think that's enough time. But in spring, nah, it's a little bit too early for me, son. Like it's a whole bunch of new players. It's a brand new meta too, and you never know how new players are going to react in a new meta. So, and usually they react poorly within it. So, yeah, I think this is the perfect spot for CLG. I think they have some good trajectory for like room to grow. So that's what I especially look forward to. So next we're going to do, I think, FlyQuest. So FlyQuest is coming out with basically a pretty mediocre lineup. Not going to lie. I wasn't impressed with Kumo basically ever. Not to be a harsh dude, but I don't think he brings anything to the table. Like, let's put it that way, right? He's not an aggressive top laner. He doesn't play like hard carry style. He's not, a tank player or anything. He's not great on tanks. He's not great on initiation. Like, there's nothing really that he specializes in. And so that's why I find it pretty lackluster from him as a top laner. Then you have Jose Dioto, which he had like small, bright flashes and whatnot, but realistically, I don't know why anyone brought him over into the LCS. I think, yeah, his stint on Rainbow 7, he looked good, but the point is that is over in that region, right, with significantly weaker teams. So obviously someone who is somewhat good is going to look good over in that region. But when you bring him over into a stronger region, you better be damn sure that this player is actually really fucking good. And so far, I haven't seen it from this guy. So I'm pretty disappointed in him. And I feel like with this entire lineup itself, I don't really see the entire strength of it. I mean, with this French dude, Tukui, he's coming from a strong region, right? The French ERLs. And so, but with that said, he's a very, very, very young player. I think he's like 18, in fact. So him coming over here into the LCS, and this is going to be his first time away from home, people, meme on that of just like, oh, they need to have the comfort food, etc., blah, blah, blah. Like, no, not that, but like being in your familial network, as it were, is pretty important, especially for you're 18 years old, man, and you're moving to a new continent. That's pretty nuts. So I think it's going to take time for this guy to even ramp up, even if he is good. And there's going to be some big question marks in the spring split. And then you have Johnson, who is the second worst ADC in the league. And then Aframu, who has actually had his bright spots in 2021. So I could see why you would, pick Aframu up. I think he is somewhat of an okay pick, but it also just goes to show how shallow the support pool is within North America, that you have to keep using people like Aframu or bringing in Olay or, using like Destiny or Biofrost, right? So I think this team has a lot to be desired. Let's just put it that way. And then you have, of course, Golden Guardians in 9th. So the reason why I put this team so low is, first, Licorice hasn't looked good at all in 2021. He is a shadow of himself. I hope he can find himself, but he is a shadow of himself. And I think with a year to kind of brush up your play and whatnot, and if you haven't, then yeah, like I don't know why you should expect anyone to sing your praises or anything. So there's that. You have Blaze Olive, who really, like, he had some standout games in 2021, but I find that he needs to have something better in order to actually like have me be behind this guy and say that he's an actually good player. And then you have Olay just coming out of nowhere. I think he's been chilling over in Korea, has he not? And so him coming back over just really shows the shallow pool of what is North American supports. And then you have this guy, Pride Stalker, which somewhat makes sense to come over from LEC. And you have Lost, who I think is actually a pretty good ADC, but it seems like TSM didn't think so. And yeah, he had some of his slip ups, but that was also too because Sword Art just was playing ass. So realistically, yeah, I think Golden Guardians don't have a high ceiling as well, which is, I think, the big problem about this team, which is why I actually have them so low. I think you could probably flip between FlyQuest and Golden Guardians in terms of like their power. Like you could swap either of those two. So overall, yeah, that is my entire power rankings for at least the spring split. This is going to be I think a really interesting year. There's a lot of cool storylines. You know, you have the super team, you have LS as coach, you know, and like all those LCK players, and then you have TSM and Chinese players. Like that's going to be really interesting too. But all the interesting storylines are like at the very top, you know, and like the only other kind of interesting one is CLG trying, you know, to do NA talent, and then you have Evil Geniuses trying out a NA mid laner, which will be actually pretty cool too. So there's a couple different, you know, spicy storylines, I guess. So I'm excited for the 2021 season. I think it's going to be, or 2022 season. I think it's going to be pretty sick. And yeah, I think with how maybe the patch is shaping up and how a lot of things have changed, the people that are most innovative are going to be rewarded heavily in spring. And I think with the dark horse of Immortals, and I think a lot of people are going to underestimate them, I think that even puts a bigger twist into all of this. And I think what's going to be kind of weird is if people end up being down on TSM at the very beginning, you know, if they don't win any games or whatnot, I think a lot of fans are going to be really angry, or even TSM fans, and because they're expecting their org to win. But in fact, that system is going to take a really fucking long time to develop, I think. So I don't expect them to do anything in spring, but yeah, this is going to be an interesting year. So I'm excited for 2022.